Hi, I'm Niki, and I think that both women and lesbians or gay people experience something similar, which is guilt for experiencing pleasure. And then, as a side effect, experiencing the phenomenon of feeling like they need to experience pain in order to earn pleasure, or they need to endure pain in order to provide pleasure, in the case of women in particular. I was thinking about this because I just made a video a couple days ago talking about like the concept of our desires being manufactured through socialization, particularly if you're born a female, and if you're just born into a heteronormative society, like you're born into a world where both those things mean something, which like being born a female, you're ascribed womanhood, and you're also ascribed anyone who's born heterosexuality. Neither of those situations are freely chosen. You are born into them, and then you operate within them. You can't operate around them. You have to operate within them. And I was just thinking about the way that, like, in both these cases, there's so much guilt to be had, and even feeling like it's okay for us to have desire. One, for women, because we're raised to believe that we're an equal and that we're objects to provide pleasure. Supposed to be like these submissive objects to provide pleasure. And so seeing ourselves as equals in a situation, like an intimate situation where there should be like reciprocal pleasure, or like even where you could like maybe expect pleasure, literally any kind of pleasure. I'm not just talking, I feel like it sounds sexual to use that word, but I'm not just talking about that. If you don't see yourself as an equal, how could you believe that you're also equally deserving of something? And when you're indoctrinated to believe that you are unequal because of your ascribed gender, because your anatomy, like, I think that you carry that with you, in addition to like self-objectification. So in the video I made a couple days ago, I read a book called I think it's like We Are Not Born Submissive, I think that's the name, by Manon, Garcia, and it talked a lot about like the concept of like femininity and submissiveness and like womanhood always having been like interlinked in this like idea that like has been like heavily proposed or perpetuated, that womanhood and femininity are like mutually exclusive with submissiveness, but it's not. Anyways, I was reading that, and in it like references this idea in relation to Freud, which like whatever about Freud, but I liked the concept, which is moral masochism. And if you don't know what masochism is, masochism is just like the enjoyment of pain, like pain giving you pleasure. And there's like sadomasochism, and I think often we think of masochism in a sexual way, but I liked the idea of moral masochism because as both a woman and a lesbian, I have felt I've experienced that like phenomenon where I felt like I needed to punish myself for experiencing pleasure because I was doing the wrong thing, yet the wrong thing felt right. And so to right that wrong, I needed to like self-punish, or like I just like internally would like be upset with myself for it. So it was like, that's sort of the way that I'm interpreting like moral masochism. I don't think that's the way it was really defined in that book. I think it was more so just defined by like, yeah, I guess it was like guilt and like self-flagellation, it says in the book, but so just like self-deprecation and stuff like that, which I guess, yeah, is like pretty much the same. But I thought of it in terms of like being gay. And then from the perspective of a woman, also like feeling guilty for having needs or desires or wanting to experience pleasure, because if you're raised in a misogynistic society, a misogynistic world, a misogynistic culture where there's gender inequality, no matter the extent to which there is gender inequality, if that is like a pervasive thing in the society you're raised in, how could you ever believe that you're equally deserving of receiving or experiencing pleasure in interactions with another person or like a partner? And in addition to that, women are like raised in societies, right, like often where they're objectified. And that objectification is experienced in family settings and social settings, through like friend settings, and also through the media, like the stuff that we consume. And as a result, it often becomes like something that we internalize as women, or just literally if you're a female born into the world and you've been ascribed that identity and you're going to endure that, no matter, you know, who you actually are. We can internalize it, and then we can become self-objectifying, which is like, so I did like more research about this. The video I made a couple days ago like touches on this, but I wanted to do more like research on this. And so I did a bit of research in general on this. And so like from the concept of self-objectification, I'm looking at my notes. So like how it defines self-objectification is this is an article, by the way, I'll like put it at the top with like the who wrote it and everything. Self-objectification occurs when the objectifying gaze is turned inward such that women view themselves through the perspective of an observer and engage in chronic self-surveillance. So as a woman, like you're constantly watching yourself and like trying to make sure that you are fitting the box that you're supposed to fit in order to have value, you know? And a lot of our value as women, if you've been raised as a woman, is to provide pleasure, to be the object, but more importantly, to make sure that you remain something worthy of objectification in order to then maintain worth. But you have to be worth objectifying then, right? Worth. And so like there's so much objectification of the female body that like we witness in the media and around us that is determining, depending on the era, what that worth looks like. And it does say in this article that like the female body, its value is usually determined by form, not function, right? So like we then determine our value based on like the way we look and whether or not we're going to be like worthy of objectifying, because that is where our worth lies, right? And so we like self-objectify as a result. And something that I found interesting, well, there's actually something interesting. So in this article, there's 7 features of objectification, and the 7 features were instrumentality, denial of autonomy, inertness, fungibility, violability, ownership, denial of subjectivity. But the 2 that like stood out to me were instrumentality and denial of subjectivity. So in this, it's defined: instrumentality is treatment of a person as a tool for the objectifier's purpose. And then denial of subjectivity is a person's experiences and feelings are not taken into account. So in this case, like their enjoyment, their pleasure, their desires. And I think with those 2 things combined, you are an object. You are meant to provide pleasure, and you are meant to be submissive in order to do so, right? Like that is how women, I'm in the United States, so that is like the socialization that we endure. And in addition to that, when we are objectified, we are denied our subjectivity. And so to then continue to have a subjective experience, because that's like inherent to us, you cannot escape your subjective internal experience, you erase yourself from the narrative in order to still exist in the form that you're meant to exist, you know? Like you have to end up denying your own subjectivity. I think it's not that you have to end up doing it. I think that when so much of your life is spent being an object, being objectified or experiencing objectification, where like you are denied like a sense of subjectivity, like a sense of agency and like your own internal world like is never recognized, I think it can be pretty easy to then start to ignore yourself and sort of erase yourself from the narrative, you know, and then deny your own desires and experiences and feelings. And so then to have them, you probably, I mean, I experienced this, you repress them because it doesn't matter as much as it does to continue to be what you will make you worthy, which is the thing being objectified. And I think it can be quite common then to repress everything about us, everything about our experience, and feel guilty if that does come up or come out, and then have expectation of equality or like equal experience or like reciprocal pleasure, because that's not the point. That's not what gives us value or purpose. That's not what we've been socialized to do. And I've definitely experienced this. Like I was thinking about different ways in which I've done that, but I think a lot of people experience this, right? We have a term for it, people pleasing. Like I've definitely had the experience where I've believed in the past that my worth came from being able to provide pleasure to others in whatever way that is, like do things for others and make them happy. Like all of my worth came from my ability to do that, people pleasing. But I do also think that that's just like an inherent side effect also of being objectified, you know, being told that you are an object of pleasure. And I feel like that was something I really struggled with for a long time. And it wasn't until like the past year or so that I realized that relationships are reciprocal, and a healthy relationship must be reciprocal. Like a one-sided relationship is never going to be like a healthy relationship, you know? But that was difficult for me to internalize. It was difficult for me for a long time to view relationships as something that could be reciprocal without that meaning that I was failing. Because if it wasn't all about them, then it was nothing, you know, because I apparently like could provide nothing because I was just supposed to provide pleasure. I don't feel that way anymore. But that was like ideas that I used to have about myself. And I was raised in a very traditional, like homophobic, I'm a lesbian, I feel like I said that, homophobic household, very traditional, like gender roles. I was raised in a very conservative, traditional town. It is not fluidity and like any sort of like diversity and gender norms or roles or sexuality was not something I was exposed to until I moved away and across the country. Anyways, it made me think of that, right? And then it made me think of, in addition to that, like, well, actually, this is interesting. So there is a lot of research linking objectification to eating disorder development in women, which I also found a little bit like relevant to this in the sense that we will endure pain if it means that we are still able to be the thing that provides pleasure. And that could mean self-inflicting pain, like an eating disorder, which can come from a lot of different things, like a need for control. But I would even argue that at times, restricting yourself can be like a manifestation of feeling like the walls are always closing in on you and like restricted in your outer world, right? There's different reasons that people like restrict it and struggle with eating disorders. But part of it is appearance, right? Is aesthetic. When your body has been judged by form, not function, you're willing to like forego keeping it functioning in a nourished way in order to like have the preferred form. So you'll endure that pain. And then I think that there's so much about like womanhood that comes with pain in order to provide pleasure, less so about receiving it, or getting pleasure from that. Or we live in a pretty, I don't want to get to it, but like the sexual aspect, like there's a lot of violence, sexual violence, like depicted in that women experience that's been sort of like, I think a lot of like what women are exposed to growing up is an idea through media and through interactions with like friends or at school, is the idea that women should be sort of, I'm going to say like, be in a sadomasochistic situation, like sexually, where they are enduring pain in order to provide pleasure. So that's another way in which I think we're socialized to think that we must endure pain in order to provide the pleasure for others, and at the expense of our pleasure, because we're not equal, and so we're not even equally considering ourselves. I think we're denying our own subjectivity in order to be the tool, instrumentality. And anyways, I thought that was really interesting, right? I'll also put all of the things that I am referencing, like reading down below. But that was what I was thinking about from the concept of womanhood or femalehood. I don't know if that's really a term, but if you've endured a woman's socialization. And then I was thinking about the aspect of being a lesbian and the guilt, like that moral masochism, because there's a whole other kind of pain that you will experience while experiencing pleasure if you have queer guilt or queer shame, And I think shame is like a very fundamental feeling that comes with both of these situations, the experience of like pleasure as a woman or lack thereof as a woman, and pleasure as a queer person who has been socialized in a homophobic society or experienced a lot of homophobia or has a lot of internalized homophobia. I think shame is like very instrumental and something that will really like can like consume you and you don't even realize it. Like I was doing some research on shame, and quite a bit of it talks about how shame is often like an internal unconscious thing. Like you might not even realize how much your shame is affecting your actions every day, There was one article I read about shame, and I think it like speaks to this idea of like erasing yourself from the narrative because you don't see yourself as equal, like as a woman. And it says shame can also be distinguished from other emotions and its behavioral outcomes, including as a desire to hide, isolate from others, and erase the self. And so I think that speaks pretty much to what I just said about being a woman. But in addition to that, there's also research that shows, which is not surprising, that sexual minorities are particularly likely to experience shame and shame-related action tendencies, namely depression, social anxiety, suicidal thoughts, compared to heterosexuals, which isn't surprising. And also like the experience of internalized homophobia that many of us experience. I guess if you're raised in like a very progressive setting, you might not experience that, which would be really cool, but I think a lot of people do experience it. Anyway, if you didn't experience a very like fluid or progressive upbringing, you can carry a lot of guilt when it comes to having homosexual desires, gay desires, or experiencing pleasure from like homosexual experiences or thoughts, because you've been raised to believe that it's wrong, right? Wrong, right? And I was thinking about the way that this has impacted me, and the way that like obviously I struggled with the idea of like something feeling right that I was always raised to believe was wrong, and then feeling like I needed to right the wrong through like putting myself in situations that were painful to me personally to try and right that wrong. And so for me, that was like trying to be straight, like trying to be heterosexual, trying to engage in like heterosexual things like intimacy in whatever way, like romantic, whatever, as a way to try and like right this wrong that was inside of me, which was like feeling pleasure at the wrong thing. And by doing that, I was like not only like almost like self-inflicting punishment. I was, because it was wrong. And so this was my action to try and correct it as like a form of like almost like self-conversion therapy. I went to therapy for like a couple years when I was 18 to 20, where I basically begged a therapist to tell me what was wrong with me and why I couldn't make myself like boys. And eventually after 2 years, she told me I just needed to find the right guy. So I like really put myself through the ringer when it came to trying to make this work, because I felt a lot of shame in addition to that about the fact that I couldn't make it work. Like there was something wrong with me, that everyone else could make this thing work and I couldn't. Like I couldn't feel that attraction. And I would put myself in these situations where I thought, okay, if I just keep putting myself in this situation, maybe it'll work. Maybe I'll start to feel something. Maybe if I like coerce myself enough. It's a lot of self-coercion. And obviously self-coercion is not the same as being coerced into these situations. It's not. But I would use this word, traumatize myself a bit through that consistent self-coercion to put myself in situations that made me incredibly uncomfortable and I didn't necessarily want to be in, as a way to try and fix what I thought was wrong with me. And that was how I tried to right my wrong. And so the morality, or the moral masochism, I guess, like really spoke to me in the sense that I always sort of perceived pleasure based on like my lesbianness, my gayness, like queer pleasure that comes in like my lesbian relationships and stuff like that. For a long time, like it was heavily determined by right and wrong. There was morality to it. And I think I don't think that's shocking, because like in the world, I did some research on this too, but in the world, there's so much discussion around whether or not being gay or having a gay relationship is okay, if it is right or if it's wrong, if marriage is right or it's wrong. Like there's so much morality that surrounds just the idea of being queer, of being a lesbian. And so I think it's not surprising that we would internalize it, or I guess I'm talking about myself, internalize it and then apply it to my own specific experiences and like try to always apply like some moral code to my pleasure and my desires for another person, my romantic desires, things like that, because the whole world, it felt like, was doing that. And I was the abnormal one, So it felt like I needed to operate by this like moral code that was the normal one. And that was difficult, like unlearning the concept of like morality surrounding my desires for the same sex, that it's not like a good or bad thing, it just is that I'm attracted to people of the same sex. But I couldn't see it that way, just that like fundamental desire and attraction. I constantly subjected to like a bunch of moral analysis, when in reality, like it is neither good nor bad, it just is. It's a neutral thing, it's desire, it's pleasure. But that was really difficult for me to do. And so I experienced a lot of self-coercion, punishment, and it really fucked with me for a long time. Like actually, like it caused me a lot of anxiety and like further intimacy issues, because I was forcing myself to be in those situations thinking that if I forced myself hard enough, things would change and I wouldn't be wrong anymore. But I'm also a woman, and so I struggled with the idea of even being like an equal participant in a relationship that is a receiver as much as like a giver in any capacity. So then it was like a lot of one-sided relationships. But I think that's something a lot of women experience when, like, if you've been raised to believe that you're an object and you internalize that in a form of self-objectification, like causing yourself pain in order to remain being the thing, the form that will continue to make you worth objectifying, which is apparently what your worth is, which is not true. No, that's not true. I just want to say that, like, if you feel that way, or if you're objectifying yourself that way, or looking at your body as something that should be judged solely by form and not function, or valued only through form and not function, just your value is inherent to you. It's intrinsic to you. It has nothing to do with your skin, like what size it is, what color it is. It has nothing to do with that. Like, your value is intrinsic to you. It is not about its form or its shape. And its ability to function is a very beautiful, wonderful thing that should just be appreciated, And at the level with which your body can function is also not a determinant of your value. You just have value for existing, It doesn't matter what your form looks like, and it doesn't even matter necessarily the functionality of your body. I mean, as long as it's alive, it just has value for being. Kind of like, I guess, like experiencing like gay desires or lesbian like desires or pleasure. Like, it's not good or bad, it just is, and it is okay that it is, But I know, I'm just thinking about that. I was thinking a lot about desire, why I made the video a couple days ago, thinking about like the manufacturing of our desires, what's real or what's authentic when you're born into these situations that you have no choice over, that are heavily socialized to have a certain set of behaviors and aesthetics in order to have value. But yeah, I thought a lot about the guilt that comes with that, and the guilt that I've personally felt as a lesbian and as a woman, for being somebody who even has desires, and for being someone who even has desires at all, came with like a guilt as both a woman and a lesbian for quite a long time. And then also like feeling like it was okay to act on any of those desires, like not only have them, but then to act on them, feeling like it would be wrong, or I would no longer be playing the role that would make me valuable, which would be the objectified role, or that it would be wrong because it's a sin, I don't know. Those are just some thoughts. I did read quite a few things for this. I'll put them, I didn't reference all of them in here, but I'll put all the things that I did read down below. If you're interested in like reading some stuff about this, just different like scholarly articles. And then the book I reference is We're Not Born Submissive by Manon and Garcia. I'll also put that down below. It's a really good book. I really recommend it. And I made the video a couple days ago, which is longer. It's like 40 minutes, but this is only touched on a little bit in it. It talks a lot about like the manufacturing of our desires and like deconstructing that, living within it. If you're interested and want to watch that, yeah, that's it. I guess that's it. I'll just say I have a website if you are interested. I write things on there, and I also have a submissions page. Like the most important thing I want to say is that if you have any thoughts on this, literally anything on this or anything else, whether it's like more academic or philosophical or emotional, like just something that's like heavy on your heart right now, please feel free to send it to me if you want to submit it through my website, which I'll link down below, or like leave it in a comment, or I have like a TikTok and an Instagram that I use and I post videos there too, but send me a message there if you want to just like share your thoughts in any way. Please feel free. I would be honored to hear them. Genuinely, I would be so honored. And I can publish them too. I publish them on my website if you want other people to potentially see it, whether you want it to be anonymous or not. But if you just want someone to see it, you can send it to me and I promise I'll read it. And yeah, so I like post videos on Instagram and TikTok, and that's it. Okay, that's it. Bye.